Every day, millions of people wake up chasing the same goal. More money. They work longer hours, learn new skills, read books, and search for the opportunity that could change their lives. Yet the results often seem confusing. Some highly intelligent people struggle with money for decades, while others quietly build substantial wealth without extraordinary education or financial expertise. Why does that happen? How can someone with advanced degrees make poor financial decisions? And how can someone with average knowledge achieve the kind of financial freedom that millions dream about? Most people assume the answer is knowledge. They believe wealthy people know something everyone else doesn't, that they have access to secret information, or that they are simply smarter. But after studying hundreds of real-life financial stories, Morgan Housel reached a very different conclusion. One that sounds simple, yet changes the way you think about money entirely. Financial success is not primarily about what you know, it's about how you behave. Money is not a test of intelligence, and it's not a complicated mathematical puzzle. At its core, money is a reflection of behavior. The decisions you make, the habits you repeat, and the emotions you manage every single day. That's why two people with the same knowledge can end up in completely different financial situations. Because the difference is rarely what they know, it's what they do. And that is where this journey begins. A journey into one of the most influential personal finance books ever written. A book that doesn't just explain how money works. It explains how people work, why they succeed, why they fail, and why building wealth is often far more about psychology than finance. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen someone make a financial decision that seemed completely irrational? Maybe they bought a car they couldn't afford, took on debt to buy things they didn't need, or invested their entire savings in a risky opportunity. And you probably wondered, how could a reasonable person do something like that? Here's one of the most surprising ideas in this book. Almost no one is crazy when it comes to money. That may sound strange at first, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. Because every person has a unique experience with money, and those experiences shape the way they see the world. Imagine a child growing up in a household constantly struggling financially, watching parents worry about bills, counting every dollar before spending it, living with uncertainty every single month. For that child, financial security may become the most important goal in life. As an adult, they might avoid risk at all costs, even when attractive opportunities appear. Now imagine someone raised in a completely different environment, a family where investing was normal, where calculated risks were encouraged, and where money was viewed as a tool rather than something to fear. For that person, leaving money untouched might seem like the bigger mistake. So, who is right? The truth is, both are acting logically from their own perspective. And that's the key idea. People don't make financial decisions based solely on spreadsheets and numbers. They make decisions based on personal experiences, emotions, memories, fears, and beliefs formed over years of life. This is why money has more to do with psychology than mathematics. We don't interact with money through logic alone. We interact with it through our hopes, our fears, our ambitions, and our insecurities. That's why people can disagree so strongly about financial decisions, not because one person is intelligent and another is foolish, but because each person is looking through a different lens. And this leads to one of the biggest mistakes people make, assuming everyone should think exactly the way they do. But what works for one person may be completely wrong for another. What seems obvious to you may seem unreasonable to someone else. The first step toward building a strong financial mindset is realizing that many of your beliefs about money are not universal truths. They are simply the result of your personal experiences. And once you understand that, you become better at understanding yourself and better at making thoughtful financial decisions. But personal experiences are only part of the story. There are two other forces that shape our financial lives more than most people realize. Two forces that make success and failure far more complicated than they appear. Those forces are luck and risk. People love simple stories. We like to believe that successful people succeeded because they worked hard, and that unsuccessful people failed because they didn't. But reality is rarely that simple. Success isn't created by effort alone, and failure isn't caused by mistakes alone. There are two invisible forces that shape every life: luck and risk. The problem is that most people overlook them completely. When we see someone achieve extraordinary success, we often assume they did everything right. And when we see someone lose everything, we assume they did everything wrong. But life doesn't work that way. Take Bill Gates. When he was a teenager in the late 1960s, access to computers was incredibly rare. Most schools didn't have one. Yet Gates happened to attend one of the few schools that gave students early access to advanced computing technology. It was an unusual opportunity, one that very few people of his generation ever had. Was Bill Gates exceptionally talented? Of course. Did he work incredibly hard? Absolutely. But did luck play a role in putting him in the right place at the right time? Without a doubt. And that's an important lesson. Recognizing luck doesn't take anything away from success. It simply makes us more realistic and more humble. The same is true for risk. Sometimes you can make excellent decisions and still get disappointing results. And sometimes people make terrible decisions and get rewarded anyway. That's one of the hardest truths about life. Outcomes are not always a perfect reflection of the decisions that created them, which is why the wisest people focus less on short-term results and more on long-term behavior. They understand that many forces remain outside their control. So instead of obsessing over outcomes, they focus on making good decisions consistently, again and again, year after year. Because over the long run, that's what matters most. But if luck and risk play such a powerful role in life, how can anyone build lasting wealth? The answer lies in a quieter force, one that receives far less attention than it deserves. A force that has created some of the greatest fortunes in history. A force that doesn't rely on luck, or genius, or perfect timing. It relies on something available to almost everyone, something most people underestimate: time. If you ask people what creates wealth, most answers sound the same: intelligence, hard work, investing, taking risks. But there's another force, one that's even more powerful, a force so quiet that most people barely notice it. It doesn't make headlines, it doesn't attract attention, and it rarely gets the credit it deserves. Yet it has helped create some of the greatest fortunes in history. That force is time. When people hear the name Warren Buffett, they usually think of investing genius. And that's certainly part of the story. But there's something even more interesting. Most of Buffett's wealth wasn't built because he earned impossible returns. It was built because he invested for an extraordinarily long time. He started early, very early, and he kept going, year after year, decade after decade, without stopping. Imagine two investors. One earns exceptional returns for 10 years. The other earns solid returns for 50. Most people focus on the first investor, but wealth often belongs to the second. Because real wealth isn't just about how fast money grows, it's about how long it grows. $1 invested for a few years can grow into something meaningful. But $1 invested for decades can become something remarkable. That's the power of compounding. And compounding is one of the few forces in life that becomes stronger with time. The problem is that most people never give it enough time to work. They want results within months, sometimes within weeks. And when those results don't appear, they change strategies, switch investments, or give up altogether. But wealth rarely rewards impatience. It rewards consistency, patience, and endurance. Think about a giant tree. When you see it today, it looks massive, almost impossible to miss. But what you don't see are the years it spent growing beneath the surface, strengthening its roots, growing slowly, almost invisibly. Wealth often works the same way. For years, nothing seems dramatic. Progress feels small, sometimes almost non-existent. Then one day, people look at the result and say, that happened overnight. But it didn't. It happened little by little, for a very long time. And that leads to an important realization. The difference between financial success and failure isn't always intelligence. Sometimes, it's simply the ability to stay in the game long enough for time to do its work. Because building wealth is one challenge. Keeping it is another. When people study success, they usually focus on one thing: how wealth was created, how the business started, how the investment succeeded, how the fortune was built. But there's a more important question: how was it kept? Because history is full of people who built enormous fortunes, only to lose them later. Not because they weren't intelligent, but because the skills required to build wealth are different from the skills required to keep it. Building wealth often requires optimism. Keeping wealth requires caution. Building wealth may involve taking risks. Keeping wealth requires surviving them. And this leads to one of the most important ideas in the entire book. Long-term financial success isn't about earning the highest returns. It's about staying in the game. Because once you're out of the game, nothing else matters. The smartest strategy becomes useless. The best opportunity becomes irrelevant. Everything depends on survival. That's why some investors quietly outperform others over a lifetime, not because they generate extraordinary returns, but because they avoid catastrophic mistakes. They understand that avoiding disaster is often more important than chasing greatness. They don't constantly ask, "How can I make more money?" Instead, they ask, "How can I avoid losing what I've already built?" And in the world of money, that question may be far more valuable. Because staying in the game allows time to work its magic. Leaving the game too early destroys the very advantage you spent years creating. And that leads to another idea that changes the way we think about wealth. Because what people see isn't always wealth. Sometimes it's just spending. Imagine you're walking down the street. You see someone driving a luxury car, wearing an expensive watch, living in a beautiful home, and naturally you assume they're wealthy. But what if that assumption is wrong? One of the most important ideas in this book is that what most people call wealth is actually spending. The luxury car is not wealth. It's money that has already been spent. The expensive watch is not wealth. It's money converted into something visible. The large house is not wealth. It's capital turned into lifestyle. Real wealth is something else entirely. It's the money you don't see, the money that remains invested, the money that remains saved, the money quietly growing in the background. To understand this, Morgan Housel tells the story of Ronald Read. Ronald Read was not famous. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a business icon. For most of his life, he lived an ordinary life. He worked simple jobs. He lived modestly, spent carefully, saved consistently, and invested quietly over time. There was nothing about his lifestyle that suggested wealth, nothing flashy, nothing visible. But when he passed away, people were shocked. He had accumulated millions of dollars. Now compare that to another story, Richard Foscone, a successful executive, a man with status, prestige, and a lifestyle that looked undeniably wealthy. Large homes, luxury living, high visibility success. But when financial trouble hit, everything collapsed, and he eventually filed for bankruptcy. The contrast is striking. One man looked rich, the other quietly became rich. And that difference changes how we understand wealth. Because people can see what you spend, but they can't see what you save. They see your lifestyle, but not your financial security. And that is why real wealth is often invisible, built slowly, built quietly, far from attention. And what's interesting is that this is just one idea among many in this book that challenges what most people believe about money. The deeper you go, the more you realize that many common assumptions about wealth are simply wrong. And if you're finding value in these ideas, ideas that change how you think before they change what you earn, there are even deeper lessons ahead, not only in this book, but in many others we'll explore together. But before we continue, we need to talk about one of the most dangerous forces in finance, a force that has destroyed fortunes that once seemed untouchable, a force driven by a single word: more. There is one word that has destroyed countless fortunes, a simple word, a short word, yet its impact can be enormous. That word is more. More money, more profit, more status, more possessions, more success. The problem is that the desire for more has no natural ending point. When people reach one goal, they immediately set another. When they achieve one milestone, they raise the bar again. And before long, they find themselves running a race that never ends. The danger isn't ambition itself. Ambition can be a powerful driver of progress. The danger begins when people lose sight of what enough actually means. Because once enough disappears, so does the limit on the risks people are willing to take. And this is where many financial disasters begin, not from necessity, but from excess. History is full of people who already had more money than they could ever realistically use, more than enough for themselves, more than enough for their families, more than enough for future generations. Yet they still reached for more. They took bigger risks, placed larger bets, chased higher returns, until eventually it all collapsed. Not because they were poor, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they never learned when to stop. One of the hardest financial skills in life isn't learning how to make more money. It's learning how to say, "This is enough." Because the person who can never feel satisfied will never feel wealthy. No matter how much they accumulate, they will always be chasing a horizon that keeps moving further away. And that raises a deeper question. If the purpose of money isn't endless accumulation, then what is it actually for? Ask most people why they want more money, and you'll hear familiar answers. A bigger house, a nicer car, more vacations, a better lifestyle. And money can absolutely provide all of that. But according to Morgan Housel, that's not its greatest value. The real benefit of money isn't what it buys. It's what it allows. Freedom. Freedom to make choices. Freedom to control your time. Freedom to decide how your days actually look. Freedom to say yes when you want to, and no when you need to. This is where many people get wealth wrong. They think they want money itself. But what they're really chasing is what money represents: security, independence, control over their own life. Because time is the one resource you can never replace. Once it's gone, no amount of money can bring it back. Yet most people spend their lives exchanging time for money, hour after hour, day after day, year after year, without realizing the original goal was never money. It was freedom, the ability to live life on your own terms. That's why truly wealthy people are not always the ones with the biggest houses or the most expensive cars. They're often the ones who have the most control over their time. Because real wealth isn't about impressing others. It's about expanding your options. The more control you have over your life, the wealthier you become in ways that actually matter. And once this idea clicks, your relationship with money starts to shift. Money stops being the destination and becomes a tool for designing a life that fits who you are. But even with that understanding, there's still another challenge everyone eventually faces. A challenge no one can fully avoid. Uncertainty, believing they can predict the future. We build plans, we make forecasts, we set expectations, and then we quietly assume life will follow the script. But it rarely does. Unexpected events are not exceptions. They are constant. Economic downturns, health issues, job loss, market crashes, business failures, or opportunities no one saw coming. Uncertainty is not a rare event. It is the default condition of life. That is why Morgan Housel highlights a concept that is simple but powerful: a margin of safety. A margin of safety is the gap between where you are and where things fall apart. It is the buffer that protects you when reality doesn't match your expectations. The problem is that many people design their lives around perfect assumptions. They assume income will always continue, that markets will always rise, that good times will last indefinitely. But history tells a different story. Change is not the exception. It is the rule, and financial resilience comes from accepting that reality. The people who survive financial shocks are not always the smartest. They are often the most prepared. They leave room for error, room for surprises, room for uncertainty, because they understand something fundamental. The goal is not to predict every problem in advance. The goal is to be able to survive when problems arrive. A margin of safety creates that ability. It reduces pressure, it increases flexibility, and it gives you options when life shifts unexpectedly. Most importantly, it allows you to stay in the game, because surviving difficult periods matters more than maximizing returns in good ones, and that idea leads directly into one of the most important lessons in the entire book. A lesson that explains why even highly intelligent people sometimes make devastating financial mistakes, and why knowledge alone is never enough to build lasting wealth. We'll explore that next. If intelligence alone created wealth, then the richest people in the world would simply be the ones with the highest grades. We would never see brilliant minds losing fortunes worth millions. And we would never see ordinary people quietly building wealth that lasts for decades. But reality tells a different story. History is full of highly intelligent individuals who made financial decisions that destroyed years of progress. Why does this happen? Because money is not governed by logic alone. It is also driven by emotion. And this is where most financial mistakes begin. When markets rise, greed shows up. When markets fall, fear takes over. When others succeed, comparison starts to creep in. And when we succeed ourselves, pride often follows. In many cases, the issue is not a lack of knowledge. It is the inability to act consistently on what we already know. People understand what they should do, yet they don't do it. They understand the importance of long-term investing, but they sell during the first major downturn. They understand the value of saving, but spend based on emotion. They understand they already have enough, yet they keep chasing more. This is why the real battle is not intelligence versus ignorance. It is wisdom versus emotion, disciplined thinking versus impulsive reaction. And that is where the difference truly lies. The people who succeed with money are not always the smartest. They are often the most disciplined, the most patient, the most emotionally steady, the ones who stay calm when everyone else is losing control. Because in the end, managing money is really about managing yourself. And the person who learns to control their behavior has already solved most of the problem, which brings everything together and leads to the final lesson of this entire story. After everything we've explored in this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Building wealth is not about discovering some hidden secret. It is not about finding the perfect strategy. And it is not about predicting what the future will bring. It is about building a mindset that can survive uncertainty. A mindset that understands that time is more powerful than speed, that discipline matters more than short bursts of motivation, and that staying in the game matters more than trying to hit one big financial win. It is a mindset that accepts that real wealth is often invisible, that freedom is more valuable than appearances, and that having a margin of safety is not weakness, but strength. Financial success is rarely the result of one brilliant decision. Instead, it is the outcome of thousands of small decisions made consistently over many years. That is why the people who achieve lasting financial success are not always the most talented, or the most intelligent, or even the luckiest, they are the ones who simply keep going year after year, decision after decision, even when progress feels slow, because wealth is not built in a single moment, or even in a single year. It is built slowly, quietly, patiently, until one day, people look at the result and assume it happened overnight, when in reality, it was forming silently for decades. And after all of this, you may realize something important. This was never just a book about money. It was a book about people, their decisions, their fears, their ambitions, and the way they shape their future one day at a time, which leads to a deeper question. How can I make more money? But something far more meaningful. How can I build the habits that allow wealth to stay with me? Because the real difference between people who build wealth and people who struggle to keep it is not how much they know. It is how they behave when faced with fear, greed, uncertainty, and opportunity. That may be the most important lesson Morgan Housel wanted readers to understand. Financial success is not an IQ test. It is not a competition to collect information. It is a reflection of the habits you practice every day and the decisions you make when nobody is watching. So if you take only one idea away from this book, let it be this: wealth is not built by what you do once. It is built by what you do consistently. A small decision repeated for years can change your future more than a single dramatic action ever could. And if these ideas have given you a new way to think about money, there are many more books worth exploring together. Because some books do more than teach new information. They give you a completely new way of seeing the world. Until then, remember this: the greatest investment you will ever make may not be in stocks, or real estate, or any financial asset at all. It may be in the mind that makes your decisions every day, because everything begins there: your behavior, your habits, your choices, and ultimately, your future. That is the message at the heart of the psychology of money. Financial success is not about what you know about money. It is about how you behave with it every single day of your life.